Dark Slab Audio on music production and audio engineering. Welcome to Dark Slab Audio and our Insights series. I do believe this is the 30th video in our Insights series, and in this video we want to take a fascinating look at the complexity of sound. So first and foremost, this is not real scientific, but I just kind of wanted to point this out to give you a really good understanding of the complexities that are happening and just something really cool to share. That some of you might already understand quite a bit of this, but what we're trying to look at is let's start out with looking at like a concerto. This is a concerto for a piano, an orchestra. And towards the end here, it is got a pretty good full orchestra happening here. And if you zoom in on this here and you start looking at the waveform, this is a really cool thing. You can sit there and zoom in on this and you can see this cycle going from here to here and then it repeating somewhat, not exactly. If you can look, the repeat is not exactly, it's a little bit different than the first cycle. The concept here is this is like an orchestra. So let's say you have a vocal. So the vocal itself has this many sinusoids in it, this much frequency content. These are the main sinusoids up to about here or so, and then it just kind of drifts off here as it goes down. Saturation, noise, harmonic distortion, other things like that. And there's lots. There's hundreds and hundreds of sinusoids in just about any sound you're dealing with. So whenever you're looking at like this concerto and that one cycle that you see from here going to here, that's representing probably sometimes between 200 and 300 instruments, from the low end, the high end, percussion, everything. It's all that's going through the computer in the system and explaining that everything at that one moment that you hear, 300 instruments, the sound wave just looks like that. And as it goes by and really fast, it causes it to produce all that different sound just from that information. That's unbelievable, because if you think of every little bit of saturation, noise, distortion, reverberation, high, low content, articulation noises, everything is right there. And then that cycle goes through, and the next cycle is a little bit different, but pretty close, relating all those different instruments and everything that's happening there, by that traveling by really fast and dictating to the computer that these levels, does that make sense? At these spacings, sample rate and bit depth, sound like a full symphony. It's amazing. It is unbelievable. Just to give you an idea how complex it is. So, you know, you have to understand that when you're listening to it in the DAW, it's relating to this system. That's what it's sending to your speakers for you to hear. Now, you would think that it's breaking it all apart. Not so much, and not the way you would think. This is a kicker, because if you go listen to this symphony live, it's going to sound a little bit different. So the concept here to get you thinking about is when you start messing around with your EQ or your reverberations or saturations or distortions or how things sound, a lot of times you're trying to get that to sound more lifelike of what it would sound live, because it's trying to shove it back analog out the speakers to you. There's not 300 different speakers that each one of those instruments are playing out. It's playing out this waveform that sounds like all those instruments playing at the same time. So the concept here, it would sound a little different. And the better you get to understand that, so that when you're mixing and you're sound crafting, you're listening to stuff, sometimes as you're sound sculpting and equalization and doing reverberation, you might add a little bit more in some area or less in area or subtract in some areas, trying to get it to sound more lifelike to your ears. Because here's the other kicker. You get in there, when you look at, say, sound, and you're going, well, what does that mean? Well, if you get in and you start looking at like the fast Fourier transform, what it's doing is trying to break all that into some type of signal and then deconstruct it into its individual sinusoids. Your brain's trying to do the same thing, but it's trying to do it multiple different times. So you have to understand, as you record stuff, it goes in your audio interface, it gets mangled. How well does it? It goes into your system and then has to come out analog again out of your speakers, and then your ear has to process it. Here's the other kicker, because your ear, what your ear does is your ear takes this information, and if you really look at the ear, it hits the eardrum, it goes in here and starts bouncing around on these bones to amplify it, and it goes and hits this water, and then it goes in here and it hits these ear hairs that it tickles for high and low frequencies and all the other different frequencies. It's like run crazy fast Fourier transform of that waveform coming out that your ear's trying to decipher and decode into everything you hear, separated. So your brain can pick it apart and understand the difference between the different instruments, and low end and high end, and its articulations, saturations, noise, distortions, all kinds of things. It is unbelievably complex, and it is so cool. And the thing here that's really cool to understand, besides how complex that is and how mind-boggling that is, that it's a really cool understanding that besides just understanding what's happening there, that it's different live than when it's recorded, or even when it's analog recordings, because it's going to be coming out those speakers. So it's going to squish it into this one wave file, one waveform, and then it's going to start get decoded by your ear. So the concept here, it's going to sound a little bit different. So whenever you're working with audio and you're going, okay, why doesn't that violin sound exactly like a normal violin if a live violin is just right playing there with me? When I'm playing on my VCSTs or I'm listening to it recorded, it sounds a little bit different, because it probably does. It's very hard to tear that apart without getting into something like MATLAB, because the complexities are unbelievable. But it does to some point. So you have to just trust me on that. And when you start doing equalization and you're thinking, well, it sounds pretty good, but I'm adjusting EQ up or subtractive EQ or adding a little bit reverb or trying to get some reverb out of it and trying to do this, that, or the other thing, because you're trying to get it to sound as lifelike as possible, especially when you got a bunch of stuff going on. So besides the one instrument that is there's multiple sinusoids in that one instrument itself, that the concept of a mix. So when you have a mix, you're trying to do the same thing. So as you mix things together, you might be trying to re-equalize things, change the way you might be reverberating different tracks or on a whole, or you might add saturation, or you think about analog warmth, or anything you might even be doing to individual tracks may change as you work through a production. You start mixing things together because of the way it sounds. It might not sound exactly like it would live after you fixed everybody up the band to sound just right. Now that it's coming out, you have to do some readjusting. I know that sounds strange, but it can be kind of true, because all that whole orchestra going through there, that's it. It comes by between this cycle up to there, that one cycle, everything happening is just being told right there by spacing of samples and bit depth going by at a certain speed. It's unbelievably complex, and it's trying to pull that apart Does that make sense? In a fast Fourier transform or reverse fast Fourier transform, in a digital world and in an analog world, because you're working with both. Does that make sense? And when it's coming out there and your ear starts trying to dissect that, doing a fast Fourier transform on it to try to separate everything out and it sounds like, does that sound real? Does that sound right? What's up? And my ears, your little hairs, and they're picking up little frequencies. That it's mind-bogglingly complex. So whenever you start messing with things, that sometimes that can be true. And to take your time there and really think about it, that you're with all that processing going through, by the time your ear hears it and you're trying to decipher what it sounds like, and especially the difference between quality of speakers or headphones, can have a dramatic effect on that of how much work you're doing. And if you're doing good work, and sometimes you're making adjustments to try to compensate for problems that have happened as things have gone through the system, by the time it hits your brain going through all that, that you might have a little bit of adjustment to do. And as you mix instruments together, you might have to go back and readjust equalization, reverberation, saturation, all kinds of things on different instruments and different tracks and on the mix's health to try to make it sound as natural, as good as possible, and as lifelike. And sometimes you're trying to suck a little bit of the life out and trying to get rid of some of those things that it's trying to, express out of the speakers, and your ears dissecting that and then trying to interpret that as what it should be. So it's really a fascinating look at how complex sound is, for you to kind of sit down and think about that. And the more things you've got going on in a mix, the more complicated it is. And to really understand, really trusting your ears and being to hear really good in a nice environment that you can hear things well is really important, and really spending your time whenever you're doing any of the work, because of trying to get that sound to sound live. I mean, if you go to a live concert, like a live classical concert, and it's a big concert, go sit and listen to one. Go to a live classical concert and just sit there and listen to it, and just sit there and just immerse yourself in the concert. Come home and listen to that same stuff on your speakers at your house, and you will start to understand a little bit what I'm talking about. Even if you crank it up, because sometimes people hear it louder, it sounds better, but you will understand the complexities that are happening, because all those waveforms are floating around all over in the space, and then coming at you at different times and hitting your eardrum and little hairs in your ear, and wow, you know what I'm saying? And it's just coming out those two speakers. So you might have some work to do to make that sound as accurate as possible and as close to possible as a live representation. And that's a good thing for you to immerse yourself in it and go check out, to try to understand that and hear it for yourself. So I certainly hope you enjoyed this fascinating look at the complexities of sound, and peace of love. I'll see you in the next video.